Good afternoon, my name is Olga Atamanova, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. It's day 356 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor, and I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance. Today, or specifically right now, we will be talking about the condition of our atomic energy. Our guest today is Hryhorii Plachkov, the head of State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation in 2017-2021. Good afternoon, Mr. Grigory. Good afternoon. So let's start with the condition of the nuclear energy facilities, nuclear energy network. What we have now was the situation for the time being. Are all of our reactors in operation, and if so, what are the conditions they operate in? Good afternoon. Thank you for your question. As per the reports from Energoatom, all the reactors work in the joint power grid of Ukraine. One of the power blocks, VVR 1000, was reconnected recently, and another block of VVR 440 was reconnected to the half of its capacity at Rivne power plant. The Russians did not shell or did not inflict missile strikes on the nuclear power plants. However, and the reconnection of another block of Rivne nuclear power plant helped stabilizing the power grid of Ukraine. So all of the nuclear power plants are in normal operation, save for the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which is under occupation of Russian military, who took the personnel of the nuclear power plant as hostages. And as per the reports from the occupational power, there are representatives of Rostec supervision who are coming to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Is the equivalent of our nuclear power supervision agency. And the situation is still pretty tense at Zaporizhia nuclear power plants. Mr. Grigorin, as to the situation over there in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, do you have any information of what's going on with our personnel, our citizens? We know that they were under very hard pressure from the occupiers. Are there any news from the people who still remain there, who continue to fulfill their duties? Ukraine has made a couple of steps recently, just like all of the experts were expecting. The State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation made amendments to the operation of the blocks 3 to 6 of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They were in different condition, and the inspectorate allowed their operation. I don't know why it was only done today, not from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Then Ukraine imposed powerful sanctions against the nuclear power energy industry of Russian Federation. And in the view of what's going on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, due to all the actions of the Russians related to the people being taken hostages, I mean the employees of the nuclear power plant, and there are also sanctions imposed on the individuals related to the nuclear industry of Russian Federation. As to the power plant itself, it's still under occupation, and all 6 power blocks are in idle. The personnel is being oppressed and tortured, and the Russians try to bring Ukrainian qualified Ukrainian personnel, licensed specialists. They wanna bring them under the command of operating company, the Russian operating company, which, so to say, operates Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant now. The humanitarian situation is pretty complicated, and the population of Energodar, which is the satellite town of the power plant, all the population is being tortured and pressed on. The reactor has water cooling, and the water level fell as per our information recently. For proper operation, we need not only stable supply of electric power, but also normal cooling facilities operation. The residual heat should be driven away from the reactor, and not all of the standards are being complied with. The waste of water from Kakhovsky reservoir poses threat not only to nuclear security, but also to the ecological condition of the region itself, because it's quite a difficult hydraulic node which was projected and designed for the needs of proper operation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So as we see, the situation is quite complicated there. As to the Kakhovsky water reservoir, we've seen reports and videos on the social network that the water is being drained. There are there any confirmations from any specialists who are aware of the situation, and such actions actually, what can they result in, and what is the purpose of the occupiers? Why do they do it? Oh yes, really, there is a lot of reports, there are a lot of news, even on the foreign media, and there are some analytical reports by the experts from different countries. What can it result in? Well, in my opinion, the Russians are trying, well, we will get our Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back. It will get under military control of Ukraine. I have no doubt about it. But the worst case scenario that Russia's can execute in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is to leave the power blocks in condition that would not allow us to recommission them, or otherwise we will need a lot of money to properly repair them and relaunch further on. And the most apocalyptic scenario is the fusion of the cold zone of the reactor, because we know how the diesel generators reacted and how the nuclear power plant was left without electric power supply, how the power grid was being destroyed. So such a hybrid thing as the level of water in Kakhovsky water reservoir is the hybrid approach of Russian Federation, is the matter of blackmailing. They were blackmailing first with the electric power, and now they blackmail us with the level of water. So the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, from the moment of its capturing, they remain the instrument of intimidation for the whole world. So it's a hybrid thing, scenario of hybrid actions by Russian Federation. Well, there are questions on the floor. Good afternoon, Yana Koloda, Ukrinform. My question is as follows. What's your opinion on the small module reactors? How possible is the implementation of such technologies useful and feasible for Ukraine? Well, look, the matter of small module reactors, well, look, there are more news, just a second, more news. The operating organization, there is a solution of the Cabinet of Ministers as the operating organization with regard to development of the blocks under American technology. And as to the small module reactors, we should start with our legislation. Our legislation unfortunately does not allow us to license any new technology in this field because historically it was so that the design of the reactors was of Soviet era. They were VVR 1000 and VVR 440. So I'm only pro. The small module reactors will help us in reconstruction of our destroyed power infrastructure. Well, not only power infrastructure, but economy of the country in general. But there is no single small module reactor all around the world. Well, there is only one licensed by NuScale company, but there is no ready-built small module reactor which would have been used in industry. It's way maybe up to year 2030, but we should start the work on licensing and options for adding not only small module reactors but any new technologies into nuclear industry. Well, and we should start it not from corporatization of our nuclear industry or choice of reactors, but from the amendments to the legislation so Ukraine is able to license any new technology which is already licensed by other regulators in other countries. But this type of technology really would help us. And in my opinion, the handover of such technologies during war is not something any country will dare to do. I mean, for us, no country would dare to hand us the technologies of either big or small reactors while there is active warfare in Ukraine. So your opinion is that Ukraine cannot start building new reactors during the war? No, I don't think so. It poses a very big risk. But as to the small module reactors, may the small private companies be involved in the construction and operation for their commissioning and operation for their own? Well, I give the same answer to all the journalists. Our legislation does not prohibit a private company to operate a nuclear facility, but in order to operate a nuclear facility, a private company has to comply with a number of licensing conditions, a lot of licensing and other conditions which are contemplated by our legislation, starting from physical protection of the facility and go all the way to the utilization of the used nuclear fuel. However, our legislation again does not restrict a private operator to work on nuclear facilities. It's not prohibited. Mr. Hryhorii, one more question. You mentioned that now all of our capacities are in full operation, all reactors are relaunched. So could you give us maybe a figure how the generation of nuclear facilities can cover our consumption needs, maybe in percentage? Well, the information as to the generation of our nuclear facilities is classified, unfortunately, so that our enemy does not have this information anyway. However, I can answer this way. Before the war, nuclear power generation accounted maybe from 50% of the total electric power generated by the power grid of Ukraine. So the nuclear power plants are quite an important component. The generation, it's pretty big percentage of generation which is fulfilled by our nuclear power plant comparing to all other components of our power grid. So more than a half of all the electric power generated in Ukraine. But again, we have to know that the consumption fell significantly as well because a lot of businesses are out of operation, a lot of industrial facilities, and a lot of individual consumers who left Ukraine. They all contributed to the reduction of consumption of electric power in Ukraine. So this is a complex figure. We can calculate it, but both generation and all those events during shelling of our critical infrastructure, they change dynamically and dramatically. So I wouldn't like to say to what extent the nuclear power generation covers our needs, and on the other hand, it's not probably proper time for that. And as to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, we've all heard and we've seen the attempts to create a safe zone around our nuclear power plant, and there were attempts by IAEA with their participation. There were negotiations. So what's your opinion? Are such negotiations going to end successfully? I mean, in terms of a creation of such safe zone around nuclear power plant? Well, I don't think that Russians will agree to create such a safe zone around nuclear power plant of Zaporizhzhia, and all the attempts undertaken by IAEA are not successful so far because for what we see, such zone is still not created, and the Russians keep using the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as the military base and platform for location of their military personnel and storage of ammunition, but there is no single organization in the world which would have had a technical mandate for surveillance and monitoring and proper reaction to such situations in nuclear power plants other than IAEA. Unfortunately, they don't have political mandate and they can only report during United Nations Security Council. They can report to Secretary General of the United Nations. But again, for what we see after the negotiations of Mr. Director General of IAEA, the Russians keep saying, yeah, we've heard you, but we will continue negotiations and consultations. And unfortunately, I've even heard that the Russians plan for to start some modernization on the first and fourth power blocks of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So unfortunately, the attempts, the efforts of IAEA were inefficient, and I think it would be more efficient to impose the sanctions on Rosatom by the European atoms, as well as on the individuals related to Rosatom, and such instrument would be more efficient than just influence of IAEA because their authority as the respected international organization didn't work here. But this is my personal opinion. This is my I want to emphasize, this is my personal opinion, my assessment of the work done by MAGATE. I want to thank you for joining our broadcast, dear colleagues. I'm reminding you, joining us was Georgy Plachkov, the head of the General Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation in 2017-2021. Our next briefing is at 1400. We wait Aider Rustemov, Mufti of Crimea, head of the spiritual administration of Muslims of Crimea, to join us in this studio. We will talk about the situation in Crimea. We will talk about how about religious diplomacy and how the religious community went through this year, what's going on with Crimean Tatars, about their support and mobilization and evacuation. So bear with us, work together for victory, and trust in our armed forces. Glory to Ukraine.